You know, it feels like the absolute, ultimate injustice right now.
Oh boy. What is it this time?
I am trying to research the sources for this deep dive, right? For you, the listener, to get the best content. But my internet provider is just completely throttling my Wi-Fi.
Right, because everything is a conspiracy against your homework.
I mean, it is buffered 4 times in the last 10 minutes. I'm just saying, the system is completely rigged against us. It is genuinely a toxic environment for my productivity.
Okay, well, let's unpack this because your Wi-Fi buffering is tragic, truly. My heart bleeds for your load times.
Thank you. Finally, some empathy.
But if you want to talk about a system being genuinely fundamentally rigged, I've got the receipts right here in our sources.
Wait, do you think you can top a deliberately throttled bandwidth?
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
Because today, our mission for this deep dive is to explore the French Revolution.
Oh, okay. Going historical.
Yeah, it is basically the historical masterclass in what happens when the mechanics of a society are actually designed to crush the vast majority of its people. And honestly, looking at these sources, your definition of a rigged system is about to be seriously humbled.
Okay, bed. Show me a system worse than my ISP. I'm ready.
Challenge accepted. So let's set the scene for you. We are dropping into France in 1774. The country is operating under what historians call the old regime.
Right, so we're talking kings and queens.
Exactly. You've got King Louis XVI. He ascends the throne when he is just 20 years old, and he's married to the Austrian princess, Marie Antoinette.
20. Wait, at 20, I'm literally just hoping to survive exams, not run an entire European geopolitical powerhouse. That is an unhinged amount of pressure.
It really was. And he was walking into a complete financial disaster. Upon his accession, the new king finds a completely empty treasury.
Like $0.
Worse than zero. They had inherited a massive national debt of 2 billion livres, which was the currency in France back then.
Wait, how do you mathematically bankrupt a whole country? 2 billion livres sounds like they just completely maxed out the national credit card. What were they even buying?
War, mostly.
Yeah, it'll do it.
Generations of armed conflict had completely drained the financial resources of France. Under Louis XVI, France actually funded and helped the 13 American colonies gain their independence from Britain.
Oh, right, because they hated the British.
Exactly. But that proxy war alone added more than 1 billion livres to a debt that was already spiraling. Because of this, lenders started charging 10% interest on state loans.
Ouch. 10% on billions.
Yeah. So the French government was spending a massive, unsustainable percentage of its national budget just making the minimum interest payments.
That is literally the worst financial strategy ever.
It gets worse. On top of that, they had the insane constant cost of maintaining their extravagant court at the immense Palace of Versailles.
Okay, this is giving off major influencer energy.
Oh, so.
It's like renting a massive, flashy Los Angeles content house to project wealth and aesthetics, while your actual business is completely bankrupt and your followers are starving. It's all optics, no substance.
That influencer analogy actually works perfectly for the optics. But here's the nuance. An influencer just loses followers if they go broke. A monarch loses their head.
Literally, in this case.
Right. The stakes here were total state collapse. And to understand just how bad it was for the regular citizens, we have to look at the underlying code of French society. It was strictly divided into 3 estates.
Like different tiers of a subscription plan.
Sort of, but you are born into your tier and the terms of service are permanent.
That sounds awful.
It was. So the third estate was made up of peasants, artisans, workers, and an emerging middle class of lawyers and merchants. They made up about 90% of the entire population.
Okay, so almost everybody.
Almost everybody. But the first estate, which was the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility, they owned 60% of the land. And here is the ultimate gatekeeping mechanism. The first and second estates paid absolutely 0 taxes to the state.
0. None at all. Wait, how does the government function?
They were structurally exempt by birthright. The entire burden of financing the state's military and the extravagant lifestyle at Versailles fell solely on the poorest people, the third estate.
That is so messed up.
Yeah, they had to pay the taille, which is a direct land tax to the state, plus indirect taxes on everyday survival items like salt and tobacco.
Taxing salt, that's just mean.
And if that wasn't enough, the church extracted its own separate share of taxes called tithes, directly taking 1/10 of the agricultural produce from the peasants.
So it's basically like a massive corporation where the entry-level workers are paying the salaries of the board of directors, but the workers hold 0% of the voting stock.
That corporate analogy is spot on.
I mean, the people with the least money are financing the people with the most. That is mathematically doomed to fail.
It totally is. The mechanics of the economy were designed to funnel wealth upward. And then the server basically crashes. France hits a massive subsistence crisis.
Meaning what exactly? Like a famine?
Kind of. The population of France grew rapidly, from about 23 million to 28 million. That drastically increased the demand for food. But agricultural production at the time was relatively inelastic.
Right, you can't just spawn more wheat.
Exactly. Add in a few seasons of bad harvests, and the production of grain couldn't keep up with the population. The price of bread, which was the absolute caloric staple for the majority, skyrocketed.
Let me guess, wages didn't go up to match the inflation.
Of course not. Wages didn't keep pace with prices. The economic gap between the rich and the poor escalated from a divide into an unbridgeable canyon. People literally could not afford the calories required to survive.
Wait, I have a logical question here.
Go for it.
If the third estate was 90% of the population, and they were the ones doing all the labor, paying all the taxes, and doing all the starving,
Yeah.
why didn't they just unionize and vote the executives out? Like, just outvote the nobles and rewrite the corporate bylaws?
Here's where it gets really interesting, and where you see exactly how the rules were engineered against them. In the old regime, the monarch didn't actually have the power to impose new taxes entirely on his own.
Oh, he didn't?
No, he had to call a meeting of a political body called the Estates General to pass the proposals. But only the king could decide when to call this meeting.
Wait.
Care to guess when the last time it met was before 1789?
I don't know, maybe 20 years prior.
Try 1614.
Are you kidding me? Over 150 years ago?
Yep.
They just didn't hold a meeting for a century and a half.
Exactly. They just ignored the mechanism entirely. So in May 1789, Louis XVI is so financially desperate that he finally calls an assembly of the Estates General to pass new taxes.
Wow, so he's finally forced to listen to the people.
Well, not quite. The delegates show up at a resplendent hall in Versailles. The first and second estates send 300 representatives each, and they get to sit in comfortable rows facing each other.
Sounds nice. And the third estate?
The third estate sends 600 representatives, and they are forced to literally stand at the back of the hall.
Okay, the physical disrespect there is unreal. Welcome to the meeting. Please stand in the back, like second-class citizens, while we figure out how to tax you into oblivion.
Right, and it's not just physical disrespect, it's structural. Voting in the Estates General had always been conducted according to the principle that each estate had one single collective vote.
Wait, not each representative?
No, each estate.
Oh, I see the math here. So the clergy and the nobility just form an alliance.
Precisely. The first and second estates could always outvote the third estate 2-1, even though the third estate represented 90% of the actual humans breathing in the country.
The bylaws literally prevented the majority from ever winning. That is peak gatekeeping.
Exactly. But for the 1789 meeting, the Third Estate demanded a structural change. They wanted voting to be conducted by the Assembly as a whole, where each individual member would have one vote. It was a basic Enlightenment democratic principle.
Which is completely logical,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing the king wasn't a fan of logic that threatened his power.
You'd be right. The king rejected the proposal entirely.
So what did the Third Estate do? Did they just stand in the back and accept it?
No. They pulled a massive boss move. They rage quit.
Oh, really?
Yes. On June 20th, 1789, the representatives of the Third Estate walked out of the assembly in protest. They marched over to an indoor tennis court on the grounds of Versailles, declared themselves the National Assembly, and swore a solemn oath not to disperse until they had drafted a brand new constitution for France that would legally limit the powers of the monarch.
Okay, that is honestly iconic. That is exactly like rage quitting a highly toxic rigged group chat, starting your own Discord server and saying, you won't give us admin rights? Fine, we're the admins now.
That's a great way to look at it.
Who was actually leading this walkout, though? Was it like a peasant uprising?
This is a wild twist. They were led by two men named Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès. Mirabeau was actually born into a noble family,
No way.
and Abbé Sieyès was originally a priest. He even wrote a super influential pamphlet called What is the Third Estate?
Wait, hold on. Why would a noble and a priest switch sides? That's literal class betrayal. They were benefiting from the zero tax glitch.
It is class betrayal, but it was driven by the Enlightenment. These weren't just guys trying to be nice, they were deeply influenced by philosophers like Locke and Rousseau.
Ah, the deep thinkers.
Exactly. They looked at the mechanics of France and realized a system based purely on birthright privilege was economically and socially doomed. They understood that if society didn't adapt to a more merit-based constitutional framework, the whole country was going to collapse.
That makes sense. They saw the ship sinking and decided to help build a lifeboat. But what's happening outside of this tennis court? Because writing a constitution takes time, and you said people were literally starving.
Exactly. While the National Assembly is busy debating legal frameworks at Versailles, the rest of France is seething. The winter was historically severe, the harvest failed again, and bakers were hoarding supplies to exploit the high prices.
Oh, that is so cruel.
People were spending hours shivering in line just for a loaf of bread, and then the spark drops. The king, feeling threatened by the National Assembly, orders military troops to move into Paris.
Oh, no.
Rumors spread like wildfire that he is going to order the army to open fire on the citizens to crush the rebellion.
Oh, man. So the people are starving, exhausted, and now they think the military is coming to wipe them out.
Yeah.
That is a recipe for absolute chaos.
On the morning of July 14th, 1789, the city of Paris was in a state of sheer panic. Some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and decided to form a people's militia.
Just everyday citizens taking up arms.
Yeah, they broke into government buildings looking for arms, and then a group of several hundred people marched toward the eastern part of the city and targeted the Bastille, which was a massive fortress prison.
Wait, rushing a military fortress makes absolutely no tactical sense, especially if there were only, 7 prisoners inside?
Right, there were only 7.
So was this purely a symbolic PR stunt for the revolution, or were they genuinely just after military assets?
It was heavily both. Tactically, they were desperate to find hoarded ammunition and gunpowder to arm their new militia. But psychologically, the Bastille was hated by everyone because it stood for the despotic, unchecked power of the king.
Got it. It was a physical manifestation of the rigged system.
Exactly. In the armed fight that followed, the commander of the Bastille was killed. They released the 7 prisoners, and then the people completely demolished the fortress.
Just tore it down brick by brick.
Literally. And here's where it gets fascinating. They took the stone fragments of the destroyed building and sold them in the markets to anyone who wanted a souvenir of its destruction.
Wait, no way did that actually happen. They sold bricks of a destroyed prison.
They absolutely did.
That is peak cringe merch. Hey guys, use code Bastille for 10% off my limited edition prison rock.
It really was the first revolutionary merch.
But honestly, I respect the hustle. Capitalizing on the destruction of an empire. Slay.
It was a massive psychological victory. Faced with the sheer, undeniable power of his revolting subjects, Louis XVI finally backed down. He accorded formal recognition to the National Assembly.
Wow, so the rage quit actually worked.
It did. On the night of August 4th, 1789, the Assembly passed a sweeping decree abolishing the entire feudal system of obligations and taxes. Tithes were abolished, the clergy had to give up their privileges, and massive amounts of church lands were confiscated.
That is huge.
By 1791, France officially got a constitution, transitioning from an absolute monarchy into a constitutional monarchy where the king's powers were strictly checked by the law.
Okay, so they win. The mechanics of the system are fixed. They rage quit, they built their own server, they drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and they live happily ever after. Roll the credits.
If only history was that clean. This is where the mechanics of revolution get incredibly dark. Things don't calm down, they get terrifyingly unhinged.
Uh-oh. What happened? Did the king try to find a loophole in the new bylaws?
Worse. See, Louis XVI had signed the Constitution, but secretly he was plotting with the kings of Prussia and Austria.
Wait, why Austria and Prussia? What do they care?
Because the monarchs of those neighboring countries were terrified. They saw the French Revolution as a virus. If the French people could successfully strip their king of power, what was stopping the Austrian or Prussian people from doing the exact same thing?
Ah, so the other kings were trying to crush the revolution in France so the ideas wouldn't spread to their own servers and get them overthrown.
Precisely. They planned to send troops to put down the revolution and restore Louis to absolute power.
Oh, that is such a betrayal.
Long story short, the French people find out about this treason, the royal family is imprisoned, the monarchy is officially abolished, and France becomes a republic.
And what happens to Louis?
He was sentenced to death by a court on the charge of treason. In January 1793, he was executed publicly. Marie Antoinette met the exact same fate shortly after.
Wow. They actually permanently deleted the final boss. But, I mean, taking down the king creates a massive power vacuum, right? Who takes over?
Enter Maximilien Robespierre. He becomes the leading figure of the new republic. Now, a lot of people view this next period, the Reign of Terror from 1793 to 1794, as just Robespierre entering his villain era.
The Reign of Terror. That does not sound chill.
It wasn't. But if you look at the mechanics, it was a twisted, extreme defensive reaction. France was being invaded by foreign armies, and there were internal rebellions everywhere. The government was deeply paranoid. So Robespierre followed a policy of severe, uncompromising control and punishment to protect the Republic.
But when paranoia dictates policy, nobody is safe.
Mm.
Who did he target?
Anyone he saw as an enemy of the Republic was arrested, tried by a revolutionary tribunal, and if found guilty, executed. And his definition of enemy was very broad.
Like who?
Ex-nobles, clergy, members of other political parties, even members of his own party who simply demanded a slightly more moderate approach.
Wait, he was executing his own friends just for suggesting they chill out?
Yeah.
That is hyper-rationality gone totally unhinged.
Completely unhinged. And we should make it clear for you listening, our sources aren't taking sides here, left or right. We're just reporting the historical reality of what happened when Robespierre took absolute power.
Right. Just the facts.
And the facts are brutal. This is where we have to talk about the guillotine. It wasn't just a falling blade. It was an invention of the Enlightenment. The device, named after the doctor who invented it, was designed to mechanize death.
Mechanized death.
Yeah. The revolutionaries believed that the brutal, torturous execution methods of the feudal era were barbaric. The guillotine was supposed to be a humane, egalitarian way to die, applied equally to a king or a peasant.
Wait, egalitarian execution. That is so dark. So they're obsessed with equality, even in how they kill people.
That obsession with equality bled into everything. Robespierre didn't just kill people, he micromanaged the daily mechanics of society to force equality.
Like what?
He placed maximum ceilings on wages and prices. Meat and bread were strictly rationed. He even made laws about what kind of bread you were legally allowed to eat.
You're joking. Bread laws.
The use of expensive white flour was strictly forbidden. All citizens were forced by law to eat pain égalité, which translates to equality bread, a standardized loaf made of whole wheat.
Government-mandated equality bread. Seriously, like, you will eat the sad wheat loaf and you will like it.
Yes. He also sought total equality through speech. The traditional titles Monsieur and Madame, Sir and Madame were legally banned. Everyone, men and women, had to address each other strictly as citoyen and citoyenne, meaning citizen.
Wow.
Churches were shut down entirely, their buildings converted into military barracks or government offices.
Okay, looking at this structurally, it's a massive paradox. They started this revolution fighting for liberty, freedom from the king's control. But to enforce this total mandated equality, Robespierre had to completely destroy everyone's personal liberty.
You nailed it.
It's like a server admin, forcing everyone to use the exact same avatar, the exact same username, and eat the exact same digital bread. You can't have absolute equality without extreme authoritarian control.
That is the exact philosophical tension of the entire era, liberty versus equality. And eventually, the extreme control became too much.
Did people push back?
Yes. Robespierre pursued his policies so relentlessly that even his most loyal supporters realized no one was safe. Finally, he was convicted by a court in July 1794, arrested, and the very next day he was sent to the exact same guillotine he had used on so many others.
Wow. Karma is a remarkably efficient mechanic.
Oh.
But wait, earlier you mentioned the Declaration of the Rights of Man. What about everyone else in this society? Did this new system actually fix the gatekeeping for the people who weren't wealthy men?
That raises a crucial point, and it's where our deep dive sources show how certain groups were completely sidelined, despite literally carrying the revolution on their backs. Take the women of France, for example.
Oh no. Please don't tell me they gatekept the women after everything they went through.
They structurally erased them from power. Remember the bread shortages we talked about earlier?
Oh, people freezing in line for bread.
Right. Back in October 1789, it was crowds of angry women, frustrated by spending hours in those freezing bakery queues, who mobilized, stormed the shops, marched all the way to Versailles, and physically forced the king and his family to move back to Paris.
They literally marched on the palace.
Yes. They were active, vital, tactical participants. Yet when the 1791 Constitution was written, it categorized them as passive citizens. They were legally denied the right to vote, to be elected, or to hold any political office.
So they literally drag the king back to the capital, ensuring the success of the revolution, and the men reward them by locking them out of the voting booth. That is deeply hypocritical.
It was, but there were women who saw the hypocrisy and fought back. I want to introduce you to Olympe de Gouges.
Olympe de Gouges, okay.
She protested fiercely against the Constitution, arguing that women were being actively excluded from basic human rights. So in 1791, she wrote her own structural counter-document, the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and Citizen.
I love that.
Her ideological argument was brilliant. She demanded equal political rights by stating that a nation is nothing but the union of woman and man, and therefore both must have a voice.
She had pure main character energy. I mean, it takes immense guts to whistleblow on a revolution and point out its flaws while it's happening. Did they actually listen to her logic?
Oh. During the Reign of Terror, the Jacobin government issued laws permanently banning women's political clubs. Olympe de Gouges criticized the government for this authoritarianism, and because of that, she was arrested by the Revolutionary Tribunal and executed by the guillotine in 1793.
Wait, what? Are you serious? They execute her just for demanding the equality they were supposedly fighting for.
I know, it's devastating. And to show you just how entrenched this gatekeeping was, French women did not finally win the right to vote until 1946.
1946. That is over 150 years later. My brain can't even process how they justified that delay while calling themselves a republic.
If we connect this to the bigger economic picture, the hypocrisy goes even deeper when you look at the French colonies. France controlled overseas territories in the Caribbean places like Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo.
Okay, Caribbean colonies.
These were massive, highly profitable suppliers of sugar, coffee, and indigo. And how did they run these lucrative plantations? Using brutally enforced enslaved African labor.
Let me guess. The guys in Paris screaming philosophical quotes about liberty and equality suddenly got very quiet when it came to applying those rights to the people they were actively enslaving for profit.
Precisely. There were long, drawn-out debates in the National Assembly about whether the rights of man should be extended to all French subjects, including those in the colonies.
But they didn't do it, did they?
They didn't pass any laws. Why? Because they feared massive economic backlash from the wealthy businessmen whose entire incomes depended on the slave trade. The economic interests completely outweighed the philosophical ideals.
Of course they did.
It wasn't until 1794, under the radical Jacobin regime, that they finally legislated to free all slaves in the French overseas possessions.
Okay, well, it took them way too long, but at least they finally changed the code. Better late than never.
But wait, the code changes back.
What do you mean?
10 years later, a military dictator named Napoleon Bonaparte takes power in France. And what does he do? He officially reinstates slavery to appease the plantation owners. Those owners understood their freedom as explicitly including the right to enslave others for their own economic advancement.
Napoleon doing that is major cringe. Taking away freedom after it was officially given just to boost profit margins. That is evil. When did the system actually get fixed?
Slavery wasn't permanently abolished in French colonies until 1848.
So, synthesizing all of this, we started this deep dive talking about a rigged system. The Third Estate broke the system, but then they just built new systems that were rigged in entirely different ways.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it.
I mean, Robespierre chopping heads off in the name of equality, women getting legally sidelined for a century and a half, slavery getting abolished and then brought right back for profit. Was this revolution even worth the blood?
That is the ultimate so what of this entire era. The French Revolution was incredibly messy, it was horrifically violent, and it was packed with massive structural contradictions. But we absolutely cannot deny its historical legacy.
Because it set a precedent.
Exactly. It successfully broke the back of the feudal system. It proved, permanently, that a society based on divine right and inherited privilege could be dismantled by the collective action of regular people. The Declaration of the Rights of Man, despite its massive flaws in execution, introduced the very concepts of freedom of speech, it ended royal censorship, and it established the vital idea of equality before the law.
So it was essentially the highly unstable, deeply messy beta test for modern democracy.
That is the perfect analogy, and the ideas from that beta test went viral globally. They spread from France to the rest of Europe throughout the 19th century, causing deeply entrenched feudal systems everywhere to finally collapse.
Wow.
More than that, these exact ideas inspired anti-colonial movements across the globe. Colonized peoples took the French idea of freedom and reworked it to fight for their own sovereign nation-states.
So it actually had a ripple effect outside of Europe.
Absolutely. Individuals in India, like Tipu Sultan and Ramohan Roy, directly responded to the revolutionary ideas coming out of France. The historical figures from our sources today, despite all their terrifying flaws and the absolute chaos they unleash, are a massive structural reason why you, the listener, have basic democratic rights today.
That is actually profound. They essentially rioted and tore down the server so that we could eventually vote.
And it leaves us with a final thought to really mull over.
Lay out on me.
The French Revolution shows us that destroying a rigged system is comparatively easy. A few thousand angry people can tear down a Bastille. But building a fair, functional system from the rubble, that is incredibly hard.
Yeah, the building part is always harder than the destroying part.
It requires balancing justice with mercy and personal freedom with societal order. So we have to ask ourselves, and you listening to this right now, think about this. If you were living through it, would you have stopped at the moderate, flawed constitutional monarchy of 1791, even knowing the king was secretly plotting against you?
That's a tough call.
Or would you have risked the absolute chaos, paranoia, and violence of the unhinged republic to try and force total equality? Ultimately, how much chaos is the actual price of freedom?
Okay, bet. My mind is officially blown. How much chaos is the price of freedom? Wow. This history essay is basically going to write itself now.
Glad I could help.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi throttling doesn't even feel that bad compared to the reign of terror. If I don't totally slay this exam after learning all the mechanics of this, I'm basically asking for the academic guillotine. I've got to go study. Bye.